Hello, my name is Ray Gambrel, and I'm the producer of the show that you're watching tonight. On the phone tonight, I have Bishop Seán Manchester. He's basically a specialist in demonology and vampires and many other things, actually. So I'd like to welcome you to the show, Bishop.
Good evening. It's a pleasure.
Cool. First off, let's start with the definition of a vampire, because I know that with all the movies that are out, people have all kinds of different views of what a vampire is. Can you tell us what a real vampire is?
The phenomenon possesses the terrible qualities of both apparition and demon, and seems to assume the form of a dead body reanimated in the darkest hours, quintessentially for the purpose of sucking the blood of the living. So they come into existence for us when a demonic entity manifests or masquerades as a dead person, occupies a corporeal shell and invests it with apparent supernatural qualities, but in essence a predatory race, distinguished from other demons by its predilection for blood, which helps sustain its physical manifestation. Revenants of this kind are attracted to blood, of which they feed, and as most will be aware in the field of demonolatry, the smallest drop of blood can be used by a demonic entity to enable it to form a tangible body.
Okay, do vampires, are they mostly seen in cemeteries, or can you see them basically anywhere?
Technically anywhere. My own experience of this phenomenon has been in graveyards and derelict houses and places not frequently visited by people at night. Woods, lonely woods. No, I wouldn't say they walk among us as they might do in films and literature. That's not so they couldn't.
Okay. What would make a person more prone to be subject to become a vampire after they've died? Would it be an interest in the occult or anything like that?
Through the black arts.
Okay.
That would certainly be one aspect. I mean, the cause is very often, if it is somebody who's attracted the demonic energy towards themselves, it would be somebody who's led a life of more than ordinary immorality and unbridled weakness. So the corporeal form is believed to be one who might have devoted himself during his life to the practice of the dark occult. And it is hardly supposed that such persons would rest undisturbed, whilst easy to believe they might, or their malevolence at least, might set into action forces that prove powerful beyond the grave.
Okay. Now, if a demon does, basically enter the corpse, is there still the original conscience of the person who had lived? Is that still there?
This point has been discussed by demonologists down the centuries. Church theologians and writers on the subject are not clear, and nobody can be absolutely certain. I think the author of demonology, who's King James, thought that it was purely a masquerading demonic manifestation, that the soul of the person was not involved or trapped. I'm not so sure, and others take a different view as well. I think there's a possibility that provided the person has not become truly dead, there is the possibility of them being trapped in a twilight, their soul becoming trapped in a twilight, but not once they are true dead. That I don't think is likely to happen. So it would be someone who is already contaminated before death and are suspended in this undead for want of a word, condition through the demonic interference. But exorcism, of course, would release both the demon and the person to return to the proper state of what would be essentially true death.
Okay. Now, if a person came across what they believe to be a vampire, or they'd seen something to that effect, is there any way they can protect themselves, or should they contact someone for like an exorcism?
Well, it depends on the circumstances. Obviously, if they are in a situation where they are suddenly confronted by what they suspect to be a demonic manifestation, particularly a vampiric one, they're in rather dangerous situation and would be best placed to utter a prayer if they know one. If they have any holy things or Christian images to produce them, but very few people go around with holy water and incense, which is hateful to these entities. Certain trees and herbs keep them away, the whitethorn and particularly garlic. There's all manner of things, but it's unlikely that most people would be walking around with these accoutrements and antidotes. However, if they suspect that there is such activity in their environment, or they know of it elsewhere, they should contact someone who is knowledgeable and not attempt to deal with it themselves.
Right, so like in the older films, when they used a crucifix or they used garlic or holy water, that was actually true. That was, you could actually do that.
Yes, something which is invested with the power of the triumph of good over evil, the faith that is invested in that. But equally, it would be true to say that even without faith, certain herbs and smells even are hateful to these and to demons generally. And it has been the case, and it's been recorded since the ancient times. The Romans employed garlic widely, and there are other herbs as well. But most people won't be familiar with these, and I mean, I think the staple for the Christians, certainly holy water and the crucifix and silver and salt, but most of all faith, would be certainly a deterrent. It wouldn't necessarily exorcise, but it would deter the possible interference and worse still contamination. It requires exorcism to cast these entities out, and the best exorcism is the most effective one. And I originally, in one case, attempted the Latin rite. It did not, and that is the old rite from the Rituale Romanum, and it did not, in that instance, prove efficacious, and it was necessary to resort to the ancient and approved methods to finally put that to rest. There are only certain methods, for example, that will destroy a vampire, and consuming it in fire seems to be the best. Cremation, but that's not always available in certain circumstances. Not everyone can carry out a cremation easily or even at all. So in the interim, decapitation and impalement will suffice. Some people, some cultures and traditions believe that in itself is sufficient, but the church, ever since they investigated these matters way back in past centuries, came to the conclusion, and I am in agreement with their findings, that the incineration of fire is the only certain way of destroying this hideous pest. Yeah. There are other deterrents, running water apparently, and they are and holy water, relics, buckthorn, aspen, maple, as well as hawthorn, are for some reason hateful to these predatory wraiths.
Okay. Well, right now we're seeing a picture of you in Highgate Cemetery.
Yes.
And a lot of people might know you from that incident, but some don't know about it. If you can briefly tell us a little bit about what happened at Highgate Cemetery. Did it start back in '69?
Well, for me, the early part of 1967, I mean, there were actual incidents long before then, but they didn't come to my attention, not at the time at least. What came to my attention was two convent schoolgirls walking past the north cemetery gate, not the main one, of Highgate Cemetery, witnessed what could only be described as corpses or a corpse leaving, manifesting really. And one of these two girls brought this to my attention almost 2 years later, and it was from that point that the 13-year, as it would turn out to be, case began. She was, in 1969, beset with nightly visitations, which were clearly vampiric in nature. And before long, I mean, once the media got hold of the story through people in the general area writing to their local newspapers and telling of the manifestations of a similar nature in the same spot, as soon as it became headline news, as it did, many more people expressed their own experience, and it was through that I was able to contact them, or rather they were able to contact me, because I made myself available in February 1970 and was contacted by many people, and that for me plunged me into the deep end of really vampirism proper. And in August 1970, a spoken ritual with the approval of the private, at that time, cemetery owners, did not seem to have the desired effect, and the principal source of the infestation was eventually tracked to a derelict neo-Gothic house on the borders of Highgate, where it was correctly and successfully exorcised in the grounds. And a lot of people think this is a slaying or a killing. None of these things, nothing demonic can be killed or destroyed. All that can be purified, which is a better way of describing it, or healed, is the area of contamination, whether it's a place or, in this case, a corporeal shell, which has become invested with supernatural powers, it would seem. The demonic supernatural presence is then removed, cast out into its own place, its own dimensional plane, away from ours. But it doesn't destroy it, it simply returns it from whence it came. The material, the evidence, the material that has been contaminated by it, that returns to its proper time and proper existence, which means it becomes normal, natural, and is no longer abnormal and supernatural. So a haunted place or a possessed person or possessed thing becomes as it would be if it wasn't afflicted by demons.
Okay.
And there was a secondary contamination from the primary source, and that took until the early 80s for that to be again exorcised in the ancient and approved manner, and that proved also successful. And the 13-year investigation then came to an end, and the case was closed. But of course, having been made public that many years earlier, and it was on Reuters and became global and world news. It was the genie was out of the bottle, and it was very difficult to keep the lid on something which people to this day are fearfully fascinated with, and in some cases obsessed with. And no matter how much distance in time occurs between this very famous 20th century case, the interest and fascination with it doesn't seem to diminish. As you can see, 40 years on, I'm still being asked about it.
Oh, sure.
This demonic manifestation masquerading as a living person.
Right. Now, we're getting close to the end here, but I know you've written several books on the subject, and there's also a movie that I hear that is being made. So.
Well, my account of the Highgate Vampire is, the book is called The Highgate Vampire, and there are two movies actually. One is exploiting the name of my book, which is called, it has called itself the same title as my book by somebody called Arthur Bailey. That will not relate to the case or the investigation or the times of the case, or my book indeed. It simply is using the title for a modern day Gothic romp in a graveyard. There is another film in production which is in its very early stages, and therefore there's very little I can say about it other than it will be totally inspired and based on my book, and will be set in the times with a British cast. And hopefully the atmosphere and events will be faithfully reproduced in that film. I have some, obviously I'm consultant in some regards, having the film rights being optioned by me, and I'm in touch with the screenwriter to get the characterization, the feel and the atmosphere and the sense of what it was like 40 years ago correct. That is definitely going to manifest on the big screen. And I don't think, well, I certainly hope not, that I don't think people will be at all disappointed when it does, because it will express what the vampire is really all about. And it is not a Byronic anti-hero, a glamorous aristocrat. Mm-hmm. It's something rather more pernicious and frightening.
Yeah. Okay, well, I would like to thank you for talking to us tonight.
Well, you're very welcome.
Very informative.
I only know that this has been an attempt to express the unknown and the unknowable.
Exactly.
And there will be scoffing cynics out there in their vast numbers, expressing their disbelief, especially now these times. But the same people have failed to ensure the departure of this phenomena. I at least have attempted to rid us of a few of them.
Yes, and we thank you for that. And now,
very nice to speak to you.
Nice
Take
speaking
care.
to you. You too. Thank you.
Bless you.
Bless you. And now back to the show.